Ahoy everyone, it is Jeff, aka Godless Scummer, back again. Just going to record a short video. This is just going to be my own thoughts on the subject, okay? So, now one of my little hobbies, and I say hobbies, it's actually sometimes it's more like a form of self-torture in a way. It does, but it's diving into some of those theist versus atheist Facebook groups. And generally speaking, I'm going to say the level of debate on both sides in a lot of these isn't great. But even with some like quite dumb posts sometimes, I find something that I can maybe talk about or expand upon a bit. So we come across one this morning, and it's obviously I'm guessing this is some Christian guy. He's saying, atheists, quote, there is no objective morality. Also atheists, quote, slavery is wrong. Okay, so obviously saying the point there being, how can we say a statement like slavery is wrong when we also claim there is no objective morality? So now the reason this keeps coming up, I think, is if you've ever watched any of those call-in shows in the past, like the Atheist Experience, slavery in the Bible comes up quite a bit, and there's quite often an argue about how can you get your morals from the Bible when the Bible endorses slavery. And I find it quite telling, I think, from a lot of the Christian apologists upon this, that they talk about us not having objective morality. But quite often when it comes to this, when this particular subject comes up, they revert straight to a moral relativism themselves. And will say you've got to understand it in the context of the time, and the Bible accommodated existing cultural practices. Whereas I would argue that if this is come from God himself could have perhaps cleared this up quite easily. If slavery is morally wrong, God could have told people and should have told people it was morally wrong, maybe put it as a list of one of his 10 big no-nos. I'm kind of reminded of that George Carlin thing when he's talking about rights, and he said, like, well, for example, slavery just fucking slipped God's mind. But slavery in the Bible is not really the reason I'm making this video. I wanted to talk about the statement about objective morality, and I've just wanted to maybe get my thoughts out on where I stand upon this. Now, to say all atheists say there is no objective morality, that's a bit of a straw man in itself, because not every atheist thinks that way. And as I say now, I am just speaking for myself. I can't speak on behalf of every atheist in the world and where they land on this. But I'm going to come on and talk about where I land on this question, or what my current position is on this. And when we talk about objective morality, I prefer to use the term moral realism. That is how I prefer it. And I do subscribe to a form of moral realism. And I do believe that there are moral truths that exist in this world that are independent of our beliefs and feelings. Now, where I would differ from the theist is that I don't think it is that morality is built into the universe, and we're not given that standard by a creator or superior being, however you want to say what God is. I don't believe that's where our morality comes from. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that I don't think moral realism is a thing, and that moral truths exist. Now, I guess I would say I land a bit more upon some form of ethical naturalism, that I think that moral facts and natural facts are discoverable to us through as our own understanding of the world develops, through science, whatever. So I guess where my position would be is this: that the way I see it is, I believe that moral truths, in fact, are part of the natural world, and what is good is that which maximizes human flourishing, happiness, and well-being. That's my position. Now, as the example of slavery was used, I would argue, well, slavery is counter to human flourishing, happiness, and well-being. Therefore, slavery is morally wrong. So that would be my position on this. Now, when I say that I'm a moral realist, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm also a moral absolutist. So this is maybe where you could argue a bit of the subjectivity might come in. And that, we can all, there are all sorts of scenarios you can come up with where you might have to choose a lesser evil. For example, the trolley problem is a good example of this. But, or you could sort of say, if someone posed me the question, is it, is it right to murder one person if that saves the lives of millions of people? So I guess my answer to that would be, listen, yes, it may be it's a lesser evil. It's a lesser evil. I don't necessarily know, though, that I could go as far as to say that it was still morally the right thing to do to murder said person. It would still, to me, be an immoral act. But would it be? But could you say, is it a lesser or necessary evil? You can argue that. So I guess that's kind of, I would say that's kind of where I land upon this, that I do believe in a form of moral realism. That's kind of my current position. So I think there's other people who could probably explain this better than I can. I'm just diving into I'm still a bit of a noob on philosophical topics and all this stuff. I've been, trying to dive into this and, kind of work on my own positions on this. But I would say, especially the Christians, not every atheist thinks there's no such thing as objective morality. A lot of people will say morality is subjective or whatever. And as I said, I prefer to say moral realist. That would be kind of where I land myself. So there are my thoughts. That's my position. Let me know what you think in the comments. Try and keep it respectful, but hey, am I right? Am I wrong? Where could I develop my position a bit better? Please let me know. Okay, if you wouldn't mind doing me, so I'll just dive back into the YouTube thing as well. If you wouldn't mind just doing me a solid, and if you think that I actually might talk a little bit of sense, maybe hit the subscribe button, maybe share this or something. Just helps with the old algorithm. I'm going to do a little party if I get to 666 subscribers, okay? So, Okay, so that's me, Jeff, Godless Scummer, saying see you all later. Salute.